Today I'm delighted to welcome Lord John Bird, whose personal story is quite remarkable. I believe you yourself, John, encapsulated it in one sentence, which is poverty to purpose. Brought up in a slum, raised as an orphan, illiterate to start with and sleeping rough, John went to jail several times in his youth, but as the co-founder of The Big Issue, he inspired millions. He's a trailblazer on a mission to provide a hand up to thousands of people who are all too often forgotten by society. So welcome, John. I was fascinated by the fact that at the age of 7, you had been homeless and you were then in an orphanage. There's the saying, I'm sure you know it, attributed to both Aristotle and the Jesuits, which says, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man." Tell me a little bit about the journey you went on from that child of 7 in an orphanage to where you are now.
Well, what is interesting, and this contradicts what most people seem to believe about poverty, is that poverty can be quite informative and could be quite useful to you in later life, unless it's really terrible and it's rotting you. But not having the means to live high on the hog can give you enormous skills. But the worst thing is when you can't get out of it. And what happened with me, we were born in the slums of Notting Hill, a London Irish family, not enough income to pay the rent and all that, and being made homeless, and then put into a Catholic orphanage at the age of 7 until the age of 9, and then moving to a block of council flats in Fulham. So we started off I had 5 brothers, and we all lived this kind of hand-to-mouth life. But it didn't break my spirit. I think it broke my brother's spirits. And I think the reason it didn't break my spirit was because from a very, very early age, I'd got this kind of weird thing about education. And even though I couldn't read and write until I was 16, I learned in a boys' prison when I was 16, I was dyslexic and I was fascinated by books. So I started off with this kind of advantage, which was to see that education would possibly, hopefully, lead at some stage to getting out of this runt of a life. From 7 onwards in the orphanage, I went into the orphanage a very kind of nice, kind sort of boy. And I came out an absolute pain in the rear because I revolted against being led around by the nuns for 2 years. I mean, they had an awful life because there was hundreds of slum children and people who'd lost their parents or whose parents had rejected them or something. So you can't blame them, but they were very stern. And I came out and I was, heading for trouble. And by the age of 10, I was at court for shoplifting, and then later on for housebreaking, and then for not going to school, and then for stealing bikes and stealing cars, and then fraud, receiving money under false pretenses. By the time I was 16, I was a real, one of those statistics that appear in the police record. And what happened then was I was blessed because every time I got nicked, they taught me something. So in a boys' prison, Ashford Boys' Prison, I learned to read and write in a matter of a few months. That means somebody because the thing about dyslexia is it's not that you don't know words, you know words, but you don't know what the sentence means because all the little words. So I managed to, with the help of one warden, one screw, to show me that all those little words, what they meant. And it was the first time I could admit to an adult that I couldn't read properly. So then I was on to something really brilliant, which was I came out of there, I went back to an institution I'd run away from and smashed a car up at 102 miles an hour. I went back there and they encouraged me to use education and stuff like that. So I then, by the time I'd left there when I was nearly 18, I was determined to be a great painter because I'd started to paint and draw. I was reading Russian novels. I was arguing with people, and I was not arguing, over drinks or whatever. I was arguing about, what was good and what was bad, about literature and all that stuff. So I was blessed because every time I got nicked, they improved me. Whereas my brothers, who never got nicked, they just got on with their semi-skilled or unskilled jobs. And they and their children and their children's children are caught in this terrible world of extended poverty because the only thing they inherited was poverty. I inherited poverty, but I got education.
And that's fascinating because I think most people don't think of prison as a place where you're not just rehabilitated, but it offers you more chances. But in your case, it was very much the case. But you mentioned that actually you always recognised that education would be the key to progressing in life and changing direction, even when you couldn't read, and even at that early age. How do you think that came about?
I don't know. I mean, it was... I think my mother might have had some help in this. I mean, she could read and write. She was Irish. And she'd been to a proper school because her mum had a farm. But when she came to London, she threw all that away because she married a bloke from the slums and then started having children with him. And he wasn't a particularly nice bloke. He was a very aggressive and violent man. And she kind of descended down below her actual cultural level or social level because she was the daughter of a woman who had her own farm. So, and she was always reading and all that stuff, and she could write. She had beautiful handwriting, but she thought I was failed because I couldn't read and write, and she was always kind of giving me a little whack around the head and all that stuff. But she did waken the idea that it would be possible to change yourself. And that's what I found quite early on. I thought, I'm going to change. I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be somebody who gets up at 5 a.m. and works putting up plaster and building walls and coming home absolutely exhausted at 8 o'clock at night and not able to do anything. And that was the life of not just my father, but my uncles and even my brothers. They were all coming back. I was going to do something else.
I mean, I think that you were quite visionary in your understanding of how to help people out of poverty was not necessarily the route of giving charity. It was that I think the thing that you talk about was that you're finding the big issue that people need to be able to earn their own money and to be independent in order to create a life for themselves. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up, I guess, through meeting Gordon Roddick, the whole big issue idea and how that came about?
Yeah, well, I first met Gordon Roddick when I was 21, hiding from the police in Edinburgh. I had just become a kind of mad revolutionary Marxist, which was very useful because I'd run away to Paris to hide from the police in London. And I became a Marxist and a kind of socialist. And what was so brilliant about that was that challenged all of my hatred that I'd inherited about black people, Jews, Indians, Arabs, and everything. So I was one of these horrible little, however well-intentioned I was to be educated, I was a person who was eaten up with, it's all their fault, And I got rid of all that and came back, and I was in Edinburgh and I met this big-nosed Scotsman. I had a broken nose like that and he had a broken nose like that. And we became mates. And then I didn't see him. I saw him for a year or two and then I didn't see him for 20 years. by which time he had started the Body Shop with his wife, Anita Roddick. And I had been through trouble with the police for quite a few years until my late 20s. And then I picked up some skills around printing and trained myself up to be a printer. So by the time we re-met, which was, I think I was about 40, I was running a print company and I was publishing and doing all sorts of stuff like that. And he was a multimillionaire. So it was a perfect fit, you know, his money and my cheek. And I was determined, absolutely determined. I'd been through so much crap from the beginning, and I saw all of the rubbish of government thinking over the years, like giving people a handout, not a hand up, not realising that actually it's expensive keeping people poor. And if you don't make the right investment at the right stage, that's in the early years, if you don't make that investment, then what you do is you end up with having people who are stuck with you until they die. And I have members of my family who never made the correct investment in them. And now in their, you know, in almost at the terminal stage of their lives, there's an enormous amount of money spent on keeping them alive, you know, for 5-10 years. So I realised that, you know, I kind of parked my Marxism because it didn't fit very well with most of the people I was with. And I realised that it was the most important thing was to try and get people into a situation where you'd work with them, where they would bring about transformations in their lives, and you were there to stand to, you know, you'd kind of get them standing and you'd jump behind them so that if they fell over, you would hold them. And that hand up, not a hand out, was contrary to virtually all developments that were being made in social engagement, governmental social engagement. All the political parties spent an enormous amount of money on holding the hands of the poorest amongst us, and yet not seeing that actually if they made a bigger investment, you know, spend to save at a particular stage, they would be programming inherited poverty out of the lives of people. And now we have a political party, or whatever you call it, whether it's Labour or Tory or Liberal, they're all dominated by this desire to kind of give the poor more and not to say, let's get them out of poverty. I believe that you've got two species. You've got them and us. And I think people divide the species. Them, those are the people. We're going to help the poor. We're going to do this for the poor, and treating them as though they were from another species. And then there's us, and my children are at school and they're helping poor people, and we're giving them the opportunity to do that. And you say, hang on, are we going to carry on with this madness, or are we going to invest in getting rid of this kind of Berlin Wall between us and them? And I am one of them who became one of us. And that's where I believe my uniqueness comes from, and that's why I proselytize and evangelize about helping people to help themselves.
Fascinating. You joined the House of Lords in 2015 as a crossbench peer, and I've looked at your political journey. You mentioned you were in the Workers' Revolutionary Party in the 70s, and the journey went on to describing yourself as a working-class Tory in 2010. I know you dismissed liberalism and Marxism as romantic idealism. So what are your current thoughts about how we tackle social inequality?
I describe myself as a working-class Tory with Marxist, Engelist, Leninist, Trotskyist leanings. I was trying to cheese off the particular paper that I was talking to because I didn't really want to be categorised. Sorry, will you ask that question?
Yes, so I'm interested to know how you think we now should be tackling social inequality. I mean, you've touched on the fact that all political parties seem to have the same approach to poverty. You know, if you could write the manifesto for what tackling poverty should look like, what would it say?
Well, the first thing would be a declaration. The declaration, which could be in neon, saying it's easy to get people to cry, but it's not easy to get them to think. People are always looking for something to cry about. They're always wanting to go and see a film that will stir them. Oh, wasn't it terrible what's happening? But they don't do the same thing, which say, hang on, how did these people end up like that? What were the ingredients? What was the cocktail? What was the social cocktail that made this up? Where is the prevention? Where is the cure? Why is it that 80% of all social intervention money in the world is spent on just holding people's hands? It's emergency and coping. So I would say that if I was writing the manifesto for the Conservative Party, the Labour Party and the Liberal Party, and even for any other party, I would say, first of all, you have to ask questions, major questions. You'd have to do a social audit on what works and what doesn't work about government. And you'll find that there are many things that do work about government. Social security, though it often creates insecurity, is basically fair for people in need. The NHS is a beautiful example of a misplacement of effort. The effort is put into the situation where somebody has fallen ill, but nobody is trying to prevent somebody from falling ill. So prevention, medical prevention, preventiveness is nowhere to be seen. 2 or 3%, maybe 5% of what the NHS spends, it spends on prevention. So you would have to ask these really major questions. But in order to narrow it down, I have advocated and will advocate that what we need to do is we need to reinvent this concept of government. And to start with, we need to create a Ministry of Poverty Prevention. Now, a Ministry of Poverty Prevention is something that every politician will run a mile away from, because we've invented things before that haven't worked. But if you look at it, the 8 government departments have a finger in the poverty pie. That's why you get this scattergun effect, a bit here, a bit there, a bit there, a bit there. So if you actually brought together a Ministry of Poverty Prevention, that means you'd bring together all the examples from all over the world where poverty has been dismantled in somebody's lives, either by preventing it or responding to it when it comes in, either taking children who have been involved in misdemeanors and making sure that if they ever get taken over by the state and put into an institution, they go in bad and come out better, not go in bad and come out worse. So you don't have what I had when I was a child and a teenager and a young man. You don't have this ability to dismantle the poverty in people's minds, the mind-forged manacles of poverty, because we don't run rehabilitation. What we do is we run a warehouse system. So a Ministry of Poverty would bring together all the examples, and then it would build itself and increasingly take off the NHS the fact that 50% of its budget is spent on money that is money and facilities to try and keep the poorest among us as healthy as possible. 50% of people who present themselves with cardiac arrests come from poverty. They come from food poverty. So why are we expecting the NHS to be a behemothing organisation that doesn't address nutrition, that doesn't address poverty, that doesn't address all these things? And if we're not going to give that job to the NHS, then it has to be done by a government department. that would revolutionise the lives of every other department. You imagine what would happen to the police budget if you got rid of poverty. You imagine what would happen to the education budget if you remove poverty from the classroom, which is about 30% of activity according to what schools are having to. You imagine how many prisons you would have. How many prisons would you need if you got rid of poverty? Because 90% of the people who end up in our custodial system, as well as being dyslexic like me, or having, mental health problems, or depression or whatever, come from the same socio-economic group, which is what used to be called the working classes. So you need a complete and refreshing reinvention of government. And the problem is, you lot, and forgive me my trespasses against some woman I dearly admire, you're caught in, you've always got an emergency, you've always got, you're like this, you keep moving. And this. You can't think. And we've got our universities, and we've got our colleges and schools, and they're all working on the premise that you've just got to do more of the same. And I'm saying this now is a big, big time. It's not, you've got the Gaza kicking off, you've got Ukraine, you've got the environment, you've got all sorts of problems happening in Africa and all that. You've got whatever's happening in America. We really need to become the thinking animal. I don't see much evidence of that yet. I see people responding to, let's sort this out, let's sort that out and all that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've identified, I do a lot of work in the food space, and the need for prevention of food poverty and, the consequence to the health service, but also people who are unable to source and prepare healthy food. They can't learn as well. It has all those knock-on effects. But the ability of governments of any colour, I think, to kind of join up the dots seems to me quite challenging in a system that is based on silos. So, they look at health, they look at education, but they don't seem to look at problems and solving problems across all departments. And so I know you've done work.
Can I just say, what they don't do is they don't embrace optimistically the problem. If you embrace a problem and you say, this is a problem, and you look upon it rather than, this is a problem, makes my hands sweat and it makes me fearful. You see, because I ran a small business and I was a highly successful small businessman in the days of Margaret Thatcher, I was always running into problems, and I relished them because I learned. And when you've got a government which is always kind of, this is a problem, what are we going to do with this? I mean, I read in the Financial Times today an interview with Gordon Brown. Now, Gordon Brown is being cleaned up. He wasn't that kind of lame duck person who, at the end of his tenure in 2010, was defeated, and people all saw him as a complete failure. He's now a thinking, philosophical reflector, and he said something which to me was appalling. He says, "I come from Fife. I come from down the road from Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie. Where are the great philanthropists of today? We don't need great philanthropists. We need great government thinkers. Philanthropists give handouts. Governments should be giving handouts." And that Tony Blair has done it, and they all do it. They all get out of office and they become, whatever happens to Rishi Sunak or Starmer or whatever, there'll come a time when they're blessed and made holy and they'll be able to pontificate about. But when they're in office, what you've got to say, we cannot carry on doing what we're doing. Let's embrace it as an optimistic opportunity to actually cleanse the Augean stables rather than do more of the same.
Do you think that government will be, of any colour, will be able to do that? Or does this need to be a kind of populist, a movement of people like you who have a voice saying we've got to do it for ourselves because government aren't going to? And that was what the big issue was about, was saying, well, the government are not going to step up and change the dial. And I remember we had a conversation when you came up to Stoke about the business improvement districts and how sort of cleaning up town centres, we all know the levelling up agenda and the fact that, they think if you have more police presence, that town centres will be cleaned up. In Stoke, we have quite a large number of homeless people who wander around the town centre. There isn't anywhere to clean them up to. And I just wonder what your thought was on linking this to the kind of the redemption piece. If somebody's been homeless for decades, are they beyond moving into a different space or a different mindset? And if they are, what do we do with them? I don't believe criminalising anybody is the right option. What would you think is the solution?
Well, you see, you've got to deal with two things at the same time, which makes it very contradictory for all of us. Now, I'm a person who set himself up in the emergency space. That meant in 1991, there were thousands, about 7,000 or 8,000 people sleeping rough in the West End of London. If we think it's bad, look back 30 years. And there was aggressive begging, there was people urinating and doing their business. There were members of the public urinating on homeless people in doorways and picking on them and doing stuff like that. There was an enormous amount of crime. And I got involved in that because I could see the opportunity that Gordon Roddick had given me, because he'd been in America and seen a street paper called Street News and said, why don't we do this in London? And he said, all right, then let's do it. And he knew I had no sentimental attachment to people in poverty. I wasn't going to cry over them. That was the last thing I was going to do, because there were so many other people prepared to do that. I was going to offer them an exit strategy out of poverty, but first of all, decriminalise them, because they were getting into trouble. They were aggressive begging. They were shoplifting. They were robbing off each other. They were robbing off the public. Not all of them, but a sizable amount of them. And they were, because when you fall down on the streets, all of your social skills and abilities and feelings disappear. You become numbed by the need to get whatever it is, the food or the drug or the drink that keeps you functioning on a kind of daily basis. And I think so I jumped into the emergency area, but I did it on the basis that what I was going to do, as soon as possible, I was going to try and move towards prevention. So 10 years, it took me 10 years to work out this, because we were all over the world, because we had this enormous pull on us from Europe, from Africa, from South America, North America, and from Asia. People saying, can you help us do what you're doing? So we were running around like blue rear-end flies. And then at the 10th anniversary, I was asked by the Times, they said, so John Bird, you've been doing this work for the last 10 years. What are you going to do for the next 10 or 20 years? And I said, well, for the last 10 years, I've been mending broken clocks. Now I'm going to try and prevent the clocks breaking. And I'm going to spend the next 10, 20, 30 years trying to do that. And that's what I've tried to do. That's why I came into Parliament, because I want to get the governments to be working on prevention and on cure, not just on emergency and coping, holding their hands. What we've got to do is we've got to have a firm base of an incredibly efficient response to the emergency. And that means a social investment which will pay off over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because if you don't intervene in the crisis where somebody falls onto the street, within a matter of weeks, if you don't deal with if they got drink and drug problems, or they got mental health problems, or if they need therapeutic community problems, that they need somewhere to be based outside of the street life. If you don't do that, then you have this raggle-taggle world of people walking around. Remember, all of those people, I bet you a pound to a penny, if you line them up and put them before a medical doctor, I bet you they'd come to the conclusion that probably 9 out of 10 need the help of the A&E. So in a way, we look around our streets and it's an extension of the A&E. All it is a failed problem which is radiated and vectored out into the streets. But if we actually look, if we embrace this problem with the kind of dignity of enthusiasm and optimism, I think we could get somewhere. I would never, ever say a person cannot be helped to a better quality of life. That may mean, as we have in the big issue, we have people who we're holding their hands until the moment they die, because the damage that has been done to them and that they've also done to themselves will never be untangled. So I want to hold their hand. I want to be their dad and mum, because they never really had a dad and mum. So we've got to do that. But at the same time, we have to be raising the question of what can we do to the people who are kind of midway between death and disaster. What can we do about that to move them away from death and disaster? So you have to invest in them. And one of the real problems that we have is we have a treasury that has a mentality that is really about let's spend the money when not just the slate of the roof is missing, but the roof is falling down. They are great at responding to crisis and all that sort of stuff, or to some extent they're great. But they're not very good at saying, hang on, what about if we do this? Then in 10 years' time, we will have evaporated the problem, because we will have made a major response. In the end, and this I think is one of the greatest things, is very expensive keeping the poor poor. As I said to you when we came up, I said, all of these people are a sign of the fact that Stoke-on-Trent and every other constituency in the country is suffering from the fact that we made the wrong investment in these people. We did not make the right investment, and if we'd made the right investment, then we would have been able to do something. In the lives of my own family, if they'd made the right investment in a particular brother of mine, he would not now be on the edge of death, costing an enormous amount of money. If they'd made the investment in his health and his mental well-being 30 years ago, he would be a person who would have been retired now, having paid his taxes and done all sorts of things like that. But we didn't make the investment.
So you have come to the House of Lords at the age of 69, if I may say that, because it's really important to say that you have a passion for problem solving of what is a huge societal problem, and at a time when people say to me, "Oh, you'll be wanting to put your feet up." I mean, clearly you don't want to put your feet up, and what would you say to people that assume that with having had a very full life, that you would want to slow down?
I wouldn't know what to say to people. I am a young father because I got married for the third time. I made a pig's ear of the first of two occasions, and then I met somebody who said, we're going to try again. So I've got a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I'm absolutely fascinated by their skills and ability. This generation is a lot cleverer, in my opinion, than previous generations. They're certainly much cleverer than the generation I come from. They're clever, they're bright, they're thoughtful, they're sensitive. The sensitivity sometimes gets in the way because they seem to be offended they keep being offended on behalf of other people. And it's very difficult when you're a bit of a loudmouth like me saying the wrong things. But I am really in love with the potential of the young people. I think they are dragooned into failure by all sorts of things, by TikTok and all these other things. I think these are poisonous. And I would like to see much, much stronger control of the gadgetry that surrounds them. But I do believe that if we can get the wise of every age and mix them up with the wise of the young, and they are. My 17-year-old, she's planning at the moment to be Prime Minister. And you mix them up. And I think that's where we need a new form of education. We need to be bringing the old amongst us into the colleges and the schools so that they can pick over us and take the best parts and reject the worst parts, because we also come with prejudices and limitations and fears. I'm always fearful. My children go out at night and I'm always standing there with a baseball bat in case somebody to chase somebody down the road or something like that, because that's my fears, because that's where I come from. But we have every one of us has limitations, but we need to get older people into our colleges and our schools. Our universities are appalling at teaching us about how do you manage our way in a permanent crisis, because it is a permanent crisis. And it's happening in every other form. It's an environmental crisis, it's a moral crisis, a social crisis. And I think I'd like to break down those barriers. I don't want to see the old put in homes or put into special educational establishments. I want them to flood down.
Tell me a little bit about your future generations, Bill, because with that, you I think, want to tackle some of the root causes of poverty with early intervention. And where has that got in terms of progress?
Well, we ran into the problem of COVID and to the fact that all private members' bills were kind of just, written off. Yeah. I was blessed with the fact that because you have to put your bill through a lottery, and I got number one. So I was, on the road, and it was proceeding through the Lords and then moving on into the Commons. And Simon Fell, great friend of mine, we were on the road, and then COVID came and got rid of all the private members' bills. Rees-Mogg said, we haven't got time for that. So it got kind of kicked about a bit. We then tried it again, and we came, I think it was 38 or something. So therefore we didn't have the parliamentary time. What we're doing with it, we're reinvigorating it, largely because we believe that it is one of the best pieces of legislation that have come out of the UK in the last 10 years. And it came, as you know, it came out of the Welsh Assembly. And they are now getting the results, which is interesting because it started about 7 or 8 years ago. They're beginning to get the results of what happens when every local authority or every business is expected to say, what is the effect this will have on future generations if we build this here, if we pull that down here? And they're beginning to get those kind of results. And the local authorities, who, as we know, like every local authority, well, every form of legislative thinking, will always want to keep doing what they've done before. Oh, we did this, we've been doing this for 50 years, let's carry on. And it's beginning to do the mindset. So Wales is becoming much, much more interesting, even though so many people in the early stages wrote it off as utopian and idealistic. but they're beginning. And I would say that in the next 3 to 5 years, we need to be looking carefully at the data and adopting as much of that as possible. And of course, Scotland is now trying to do the same. And talking to friends in Northern Ireland, they're looking at it. They're trying to say, if we do this now, what effect will it have on the environment, on the thinking, on the opportunities of our children who are not even conceived, not even born, not even their parents are reading it. So if we don't have that 100-year look at things, then we're going to be making the same mistakes that we have made in industry and all sorts of things. I mean, I was very pleased to hear that Lord Tebbit said sometime recently that when they tore up all the backbone of British traditional industry, he said, I think we went at it too quickly. And that, I wish he'd said that then, because if he'd said that then, as they closed down industries, they would have already been preparing and educating and creating the opportunities for skilling people so that they moved from the mines into other areas. I met a miner on a train recently, and he got out of the mines when it was bad news, went to night school, learnt some engineering things and combined it with some other things. And now he's working on the railways, helping to open up new developments in the railways. And he said he was one of the few who had been equipped with the thinking that in 5-10 years' time this is all going to disappear. And we did not prepare for it. We just cut and run, and that we're still suffering from that. And one of the reasons why the the levelling up thing has been created is to overcome a damage done by a government, which, however well-intentioned it might have been, to create a newer service-based industry, service-based economy, made the mistake of rushing at it and seeing it as the job's done. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Sorry, I met somebody from the Social Security office in, I think it was in Sunderland, and they said on Friday they had 400 clients signing on, and the following Monday they had 11,000. And he said, what do you do when the government throws you that wobbly?
John, I know we're a little pushed for time, so I want to ask you a couple of questions to close that I ask all my guests. The first one is, what would the Lord Bird of today, with all your wisdom over the decades, want to say to that 7-year-old? What piece of advice would you give?
Get nicked. Keep getting nicked. Because if you keep getting nicked... No, the word of advice I would say to that young boy is don't take it personally, that you're almost caught up in this. You don't know what's going on. No, I mean, it is interesting that all of the things that, the advice that you would normally give to young children, if I'd taken it, then I probably would have been dead by now, because I'd have been ending up in a semi-skilled or an unskilled job, depressed, and I didn't take that advice because it wasn't on offer. But I did make the most of those wonderful things that Her Majesty's detention centres and Her Majesty's young prisoners and Her Majesty's reformatory system did, and I got the most out of it. And to me, God bless them, and they were very, very determined educators. They weren't just punishers. Now I want to revive that system, and I want to revive it so that our children who end up in these areas, because they are our children, end up in these areas of deprivation and need and self-harming, are given a royal road out of it. And if we get it right, our investment will save the millions that are spent often on people who start off on the wrong foot and then end up 70 years later in comatose situations where they're neither living or dead.
So what next? What's on? If you have a bucket list, what's on that bucket list?
Well, I'm in a very interesting situation because one of my supporters in my parliamentary office has said that they don't want to support me for another year, which will give us a bit of a funding problem, which got me thinking. And the reason for it is because they need data, they need evidence of what I'm doing. And what I've said is that I came into Parliament to dismantle poverty. I didn't come in to make the poor more comfortable. So therefore, I have to think in really big, broad brush things. And that doesn't throw up the data. It doesn't, for instance, if I could get a bill through that meant every old age pensioner got another £15 a month, that would be evidence. But that would be tinkering. That's not going to get anywhere near dismantling poverty. What I'm saying is I'm standing back and I'm saying if we don't embrace the need to get rid of poverty, then we are not going anywhere. So what we're doing in my office and in the big issue is we're creating our own Ministry of Poverty. We are simulating it, and we're going to give it to a government in the future once we've refined it and shown how it works and fill it full of examples. So that's what we're going to concentrate on. And this person saying to me over the weekend, I'm sorry, I might not be shining a light on you in the coming year, has really made me feel, wow. I'm so glad you see, so many people make mistakes or give you, and you realise, actually, this is an opportunity.
Yeah. Forever the social entrepreneur, John Lord Bird, it's been an absolute privilege to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.